Welcome. Everybody hear me all right? Okay. My name's Denny Moan. Those of you who have not been in one of the sessions I've been moderating the first couple of days. I'm a local chapter AFCEA member and joined in 1969. So I think I'm the oldest member at 56 years in AFCEA. So anybody here that's not an AFCEA member and wants to know about AFCEA, I'm more than happy to talk about the value it provided me over those years and volunteer opportunities. This session, this is really interesting, that we actually have an ROTC panel here to talk about risk management. It is a certified course, and so those of you that are in need of a certification, I remind you on the way out to put your badge under the scanner. And if you haven't done that before today, recognize that it's got to lay flat. If you tip it in there, it can't find you. So make sure you lay it flat on the counter. And I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to turn it over to the panel.
Yeah, so good morning. Today's panel, it's titled Risk Management Fundamental for Cybersecurity. You're going to hear from a very unique crowd compared to what you have elsewhere. So what you have in front of you are juniors that just are rising to seniors in ROTC programs. They're in senior ROTC programs representing two different schools, Citadel, the two to my immediate right, and then Norwich University to my far right. So Norwich got its start somewhere in the 1819 timeframe. It's been producing officers for a very long time. And then Citadel is right behind it with 1842, roughly, I believe. Nowadays, both schools are part of the 6 senior military colleges. So we always hear about the academies, but right below the academies, you have these 6 senior military colleges that produce not only Army officers, depending upon the university, but all the services. As an example, Norwich produces somewhere between 90 and 110 officers every year. Citadel is in that same category, between 90 and 110, depends on the year. And out of that, from a cyber perspective, we're producing about 3 officers out of each, right? So you can see how competitive cyber is in particular. With that, so today's panel is titled Risk Management, Fundamental for Cybersecurity. It's not just a catchy phrase, it's a frontline truth. You've heard it in many of the other panels that you've been a part of during TechNut. Just this year, our own military installations, defense contractors have faced increasing attempts at cyber intrusion, phishing attacks, ransomware campaigns, links to hostile nation states. I could say that for the last 5 years, to be honest. It seems like every year we hear more and more about how not only our defense industrial base, but then also our commercial industry is being attacked. Events like Colonial Pipeline a couple years ago, those ransomware attacks and the infiltrations of critical infrastructure really taught us that, hey, we are very vulnerable in many unique ways, and it can impact our society in particular. So when we look at that, it really illustrates how our adversaries are targeting or can target both our legacy and modern systems to create these strategic disruptions. So every mission, every digital operation, every decision we make has risk, and we're going to talk about that risk within this panel. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm Colonel Steve Roberts. I've been doing this about 36 years, about ready to retire. I'm the current PMS at Norwich University, but next week I'll actually transition out with Colonel Jason Dudley and then go on my own retirement path. But I clearly represent the history or the legacy of cyber from the standpoint I've been doing this cyber either as a cyber officer or before it was called cyber for about 20 years, worked in the organizations, U.S. Cyber Command, NSA, Army Cyber, and those institutions that kind of were precursors. But this panel isn't about me and the history and legacy, it's really about the future. So we really are having the future of our, not only Navy, but also Army future leaders. They're aspiring to be cyber leaders here on this panel. So it's not the old guy going to talk, it's really the new folks. So we'll hear from the Army ROTC cadets, but I apologize. I didn't realize I had a Navy ROTC cadet next to me. So it's great to have all those. These cadets aren't just learning theory in classroom. They're competing in national level cyber competitions. They're leading cadet organizations and cyber clubs. They're listening, interning at places like the NSA and Army Cyber Institute. They're paid for by programs like Sharon Hamilton that's in the audience, raise your hand. The Cyber Leader Development Program has been instrumental in augmenting what internships are available for specifically the cyber folks. They are learning that battlefield of tomorrow is already here and it's digital. So with that, I'll open it up for cadet introductions. We'll start left to right. Really, I want you to talk about not only your journey that got you here, obviously your name, your school, but just talk about what drew you to cyber, what made you go down this path, and what you want to do in the Navy or in the Army. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Noah Klepper. I'm a rising senior at the Citadel. Really got me into cyber started back when I was in Civil Air Patrol. I originally wanted to be an aviator. I got involved with the Cyber Patriot program. So that started my interest. But when I went to college, I still really wanted to be an aviator. Went into the Citadel. I was going Navy, wanted to be a naval aviator, land on aircraft carriers. Sounded pretty cool. Decided to major in cyber operations, mostly just because I didn't want to do engineering. That sounded painful. So I went to cyber operations, just wanted to have that as like a secondary option. We have a training after our freshman year called Quartermid that just kind of gets you introduced to all the different options you have out of an RTC, or mainly the unrestricted line. So your SWO, sub, aviation, and then they also had a Marine Week. And while I was there, I just happened to meet another midshipman who was in the CWE accessions pipeline, or their Slack, how they communicate. And that is, CWE is Cyber Warfare Engineer. It's one of the main designators in the Navy as an officer for cyber. And so that first got me interested. I started looking into the community. They're a very technical developer role. So I started studying it and kind of fell in love from there. And so since then, I've been working towards that, passed all of the screener and interview second semester of my junior year, just finished a summer training this summer. And hopefully that's what I'll be selecting after, or be designated here in a few months.
So what does that career look like in the Navy for you?
So the career is mainly a capability developer role, also vulnerability research, exploit development, rootkit development, all those sorts of things. Mainly focused on the shorter term goals, where longer term goals are usually farmed out to contractors. And the main pipeline just looks like you get in, go to first the IWOBIC, which is the Basic Information Warfare course the Navy offers. From there, you go to Mantech's systems programming and exploitation course, either the Linux track or the Windows track, and then from there you just put onto a team at Fort Meade and learn on the job.
So I think in cyber parlance, that's a 17 Delta role that you're looking for?
Correct.
Okay, next.
Good morning, my name is Allison Gallegos. I go to the Citadel. I'm a rising senior, and I study computer science and cybersecurity. What got me interested in cyber was when I first came to the Citadel, I started off as a psychology major, and then second semester I changed my mind, and I switched to computer science, and I fell in love with it. I loved the department, and I loved the people in it, and then as an ROTC contract too, I just thought it would be super cool to be part of the cyber branch in the Army. My dad serves as a military officer right now, so it's part of a family tradition, and I just want to keep that going.
So in your Army, so what do you want to do as an Army cyber officer? Do you know which track yet? Alpha, Bravo, or Delta?
I plan to do the Alpha track, and that's what I'm looking into.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Frankie Alano. I am a rising senior at Norwich University, and I study computer security and information assurance with studying for a minor in coaching and a minor in leadership. So what kind of got me into this track right here was I took a couple of coding classes in high school, mostly in robotics, and I really liked the whole technical aspect. and just the technical pursuit to get better. So upon arriving at Norwich, I decided to take up my degree. Long story short, I didn't end up really liking coding as much as I thought I would, but I really like the idea of assuring information and just trying to prevent our adversaries from getting any important information that is pertinent to us. And then further along that line, I had the opportunity to join the Cyber Leadership Development Program, which is our premier cyber program across the 6 SMCs, which pretty much allows us to have opportunities to network with professional cyber organizations, get in contact with internships or DoD level internships. And I had a lot of great opportunities to experience all sorts of DoD internships. This past summer, I had the opportunity to go to the Pentagon to work with the Electromagnetic Spectrum Enterprise Policy Program, where I worked with some really great technical subject matter experts. And what was the other question? It was...
So your track, so what do you look for?
Okay, yeah. So my ultimate track is to branch into cyber with a branch detail in field artillery. Hopefully, upon commissioning, I'll be able to take the experience as a field artillery officer and be able to benefit from that upon transitioning over to cyber as a 17 Bravo. That's the ultimate goal.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Aiden Burris. I'm a rising senior at Norwich University. And what got me interested into the cyber branch is the EW side of cyber. I study electrical and computer engineering, and so using hands-on aspects with technical aspects into the computer is something I'm super interested in. And I got the privilege of going to an internship at the C5 ISR Center last year. So I got to learn a lot about how you use radios and wave propagation and using them essentially to communicate through vegetation versus not using it through vegetation. That's stuff I'm super interested in. And another thing I just went to, I was at a CTLT at Fort Polk for an infantry unit, and I actually got to use I got to learn how in the field, like boots on ground with soldiers, how using radios and your phones in the field actually is a huge security risk, and that's something I'm super interested in. What I want to do in the Army, I want to go cyber, but branch detail armor, maybe infantry, but armor's what I'm super interested in doing first, and I believe being able to do a combat branch and then go into cyber will allow me to be a better cyber officer thereof.
And then on the cyber side, you're thinking about a Bravo, correct?
Yes, sir, 17 Bravo.
Yeah, and then what's CTLT for those folks that don't know what that acronym stands for?
Sorry, the cadet troop leader training. Sorry. And essentially, I got to. It's like an internship for the Army. I just shadowed a first lieutenant, and he was in an infantry platoon at Fort Polk, and so I got to basically be Op 4, or like the enemy for the 210 Mountain Division, and so that was a really fun experience.
And then Allison, you want to talk real quick about your NSA experience? Yes. And then I'm not sure, did you have a internship that you've done during your 3 years?
I've had a few internships.
Yeah, so maybe you talk about the NSA and then talk about yours.
So after going to CST, Cadet Summer Training this summer, I was first reg, so I was able to go to the NSA internship through Cadet Command, and I loved it. It was so fun. We did a lot of coding, we did behavioral modeling, and it was so fun being able to see like everything just come together, and like people being able to understand like the technical side and how we were able to protect these things, and just talking to people. I got to meet a lot of people from the NSA. I got to go, where did we go? We went on like a small tour to the, I forgot the name, but we got to see the Enigma in person and like learn all about the cryptological museum. And then we got to see the Enigma, and it was really nice to see like where it all started and how far it's gone and how important it is for us to like be aware of like cyber threats that are coming up.
And then did you get a TS during that process?
No, I was not able to get to this.
So I've had mainly one internship through the CLDP program. Went to Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. Did some work on a project where they were trying to develop a AI model to predict cascading failures in the electric grid, so they could respond to them more quickly. It was still in the early phases of the project, so most of what I was doing was working with MATLAB code to modify their simulation and streamline like the data generation to create a data set for the model to train on, and then also to create a front end to compare what actually happens in a simulation and what the model that will be developed later will predict. So that's most of what I did there. And then this past year, I didn't do an internship, but I was able to do some really interesting cyber training with the Navy. We did a basically fully simulated cyber operation at the U.S. Naval Academy. They had a full, we called it Orange Land, a like adversary network. There was 10 members on the operations team, and then I was on the developer team, so there were 5 of us on the developer team. And it was really interesting to be able to see like how developers support operations and what kind of communication issues can happen between operators and developers when it comes to developers don't really know what's going on the operation. So operators make requirements for what they need on op, and then if those requirements aren't good enough, developers are going to make something that works. It works according to the requirements given, but it doesn't work for the operation. So it was really cool to see that kind of where things can break down and how that can be improved. And then we also got to hear from a bunch of cyber leaders in the Navy, including we got to go up to Fort Meade and talk to some members of Fleet Cyber. So that was also a really cool experience.
Yeah, so obviously you see they're not just students, you know, they're just not stuck in some classroom, right? They've done much more than that. So expanding upon that, we'll start some of the panel questions. So the ones that were a part of this program. Lessons that shaped your thinking is the first question, and I'll start down there all the way at the right. What lessons, either academic, hands-on, even what you learned this summer, have been most helpful in forming your understanding of cybersecurity risk management and why it's so important?
Okay, I'll just give one brief example, kind of something I learned actually in the field. I never even thought about, you know, when you're out, I was with the infantry unit, right? So we're out doing, you know, we're just defending some town, and a huge kind of task given by our commander, who is a prior Air Force officer, intelligence, really odd, I know. Now he's the infantry CO in the Army, but he was saying, hey, when you guys are using your phones, turn the Bluetooth off. And it never occurred to me, like what, like, why does that matter? He's like, you know, that signal can be detected by any enemy kind of, like, even sniper teams that are out, or any kind of enemy patrolling going around. And so, you know, they have this huge screen that can show all the Bluetooth and other kind of devices, and it like pings them on a map in the area. And so everyone was, you know, forced to turn Bluetooth off. The infantry soldiers couldn't use their AirPods, which not a lot were happy with that, but it's a huge security risk. And so little things like that can really help out with the well-being of soldiers. And so that's something I learned this summer for cybersecurity.
Yeah, so I'll owe it back to my experience with MSIP in the Pentagon. A lot of what I had the opportunity to was, I didn't do a lot of like actual EMSO, electromagnetic spectrum operation stuff. It was mostly just reviewing policy, seeing how policy dictates the way that the government handles the whole electromagnetic spectrum. And a lot of like what I learned was really like mind-boggling stuff, and how our foreign adversaries are trying to gain the advantage and gain the upper hand, and gain as much real estate as they can with the electromagnetic shield, just really across around the world. So less actual EMSO stuff, but more actual like just the governing politics around just the electromagnetic spectrum. That was really the biggest takeaway that I learned in my time.
So last year, I was able to be a cyber leader development ambassador, and I had the opportunity to create and make my own presentations to go and present to middle schools and teach like the younger people about cybersecurity and how to manage risks. I know we talked to them about geolocation and how a lot of apps ask you to like share your location, and most people forget that it's like on the background or that it's still running, and it's a very dangerous thing, as we all know. Like nobody wants to be tracked, and it's a lot scary to think that like younger generations are just not so aware of it. So that was like the biggest thing that I was able to teach other people, and the biggest lesson for me was that risk management starts with like awareness and letting people know that there are things that we need to focus on.
No?
For me, most of my thinking regarding risk management has been formed by really my recent cruise summer training with the Navy. I got to talk with a lot of people who knew a lot about the current situation between U.S. and China, since that's one of our big near peers right now. And just thinking about and they learned a lot about like how our posture is like as a country, especially when it comes to our critical infrastructure and protecting that. We're a very free country, so companies can largely do what they want. So it's harder for us to regulate, like making sure they've patched their network, their network engineering is right. There's the right checks at each boundary layer, all those sorts of things. It's harder for us to regulate that. And in China, everything's state-run, and they just have a lot more people too when it comes to just throwing cheaper attacks. So just thinking about it from that standpoint of where our weaknesses are compared to China's, and that's been one of my big forming things. And also recently, different type of risk management, but when it comes to like operational security, I've been looking at some different, phone firmware and operating systems to do with security, and learning about the different ways that you can be identified via just normal use of a phone, and how nation states could pretty easily find you if you just basically turn on your cell signal once. Like they can find your location, find out who you are. It's not that hard for someone with a lot of information to do that. And so just learning about things you need to worry about if you were being targeted by a nation state was also been very interesting.
Okay. Kind of on that same thread, right? What do you think is our greatest national cybersecurity threat, either as a society or as a military government? And you can probably look at not only today, but in next couple of years, especially the military services that you're about ready to enter. And I'll start with Noah.
Yeah, so I'd say like the biggest threat that I see, the thing that scared me the most when I've been talking to people, is our critical infrastructure, just the outsized impact that can have from thousands of miles away if they break our water systems or our electronics, or our power grid, sorry, or even things like shut down roads around a port that can have massive impacts on a nation, especially if you're also trying to like wage a war at the same time. It would cause a lot of unrest at home, which would make it very difficult to continue waging a war. And a lot of times those systems are harder to protect or patch because patching it could break something, and if something breaks, then you have the same kind of denial of service that you would have if it was attacked. So it's a hard problem, and it'll take a long time to solve, and I'm just hoping it gets more solved before something happens.
Allison?
I think our biggest threat as a nation is deepfakes and disinformation. I feel like also social engineering, it's a big thing. People are being manipulated, and it is a lot harder to detect that and be able to fight against it, because some people are not even aware of it. So then when it comes to like deepfakes, fake social media accounts, catfishing, all that really bad stuff that people use to trick people into doing things that they're not supposed to do, or giving into sensitive data. And yeah, I think that's the biggest threat.
I think one of the biggest threats to our nations, in my opinion, is really not even just cyber. I think one of the biggest threats sometimes can be our own people, right? One of the biggest things that I've learned along my studies is like for policy to work, especially in the information assurance and cyber side, is for everyone have to be in the know. Everyone has to be aware of what the correct policies are, so they don't run the risk of, for example, OPSEC, or for example, just mitigating as much risk as you can, so everyone can be on the same page and can operate under like one organization.
one of the biggest security risks, I'd say, for the nation and the world essentially is maybe technological deception, whether that's like the phishing and scamming that you were talking about, and how well or how not well society goes about, pursuing their responsibility of detecting like, hey, what's real and what's not real. And then some people just don't care, or some don't, really look like, when they're on social media or they're writing articles or they're texting people, they don't really care what they're saying. And so, that's a risk in itself when we use technology on an everyday basis. And this even goes into the military aspect, when we're using radios in the field and stuff, how well the enemy can decept us into believing that, hey, we're on the same frequency or something like that. We don't know who's who, and then that turns into a whole issue. So there's multiple sides to it, as technology advances.
All right, so based upon those answers, right, anything from, critical infrastructure, deep fakes, social media impact, we talked about OPSEC and people, tech deception, what's most important now for a cybersecurity concept for the military to adapt to potentially protect that? So I'll start with you, Aiden, since you went last. So when you talk about tech deception in the radio, from that perspective, what do we need to do from a cybersecurity perspective to actually manage that risk?
This is going to be a super army answer. I think using rehearsals and just going over any kind of situation that can happen in the field. You can, daydream all the time in a garrison environment and, go about, hey, we think this is going to happen, or we're going to design something in this way. But then you actually go in a field environment and try to do something, and then, oh no, the radio breaks. What do I do? It's not something exactly prepared for. And so I think the biggest preparation we can do for the military is to essentially think of all avenues of how an enemy and friendlies go about, pursuing the electromagnetic spectrum, and in the cyber world too. And so I think it's just rehearsals in all avenues of, the offensive and defensive in the cyberspace.
I think the biggest thing that can help mitigate a lot of that risk is ensuring that our leaders and really overall as a unit, we're all certified in the way that we operate. You can't just handle information that the way you usually do on a daily basis, right? Especially when it comes down to assuring that the data and the information doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Ensuring that our leaders and organizations are just certified in the way that they are able to operate on a daily basis, because it's the way that we have security clearances and top secret security clearances. We don't want to just give anyone the wrong information or super important national security and donating information.
I think the biggest thing to change when it comes to the military is the mindset that people have around cybersecurity. I feel like a lot of people don't take it seriously, or they're like, oh, that would never happen to me, or this is something that doesn't happen to people around me, or we're just safe. But I think it really comes down to people and just changing that mentality that things can happen to them and that we need to be aware of it. And the other thing is that people can have the most advanced tools and they can know, like, it doesn't matter if you had the most advanced systems and everything, people still need to be aware. And like they were saying, like certified classes, learning, education, all of that is necessary to mitigate any risks.
For the China threat and like the OT technology, I believe most of this is already being done to some extent. I just don't know how much. But one thing that I think I've heard being done that I believe is very useful is sort of hunt forward operations, going into our own networks, like basically with the assumption that it's compromised and trying to find the adversary. I think also this is most likely being done as well, but make plans assuming that certain critical infrastructure is compromised. Plan how you're going to work around if you don't have access to something that you would normally have access to. And sort of things like that. And also, I guess this would be more on the companies than the military, but building in redundancies a bit more, because I know I have heard some stories like of ports that this is less of a cyber thing, but maybe it only has like one road leading out of it. If that road's cut off, then you can't get any materials out of the port. So things like that, like always having redundancies for like the most critical parts of your operation.
Okay, so, make yourself the DoD CIO for the moment. Imagine that you are king, queen for the day, unlimited resources. What are some of those near-term cyber readiness improvements that you see needed to kind of get after some of what you talked about? How do we use technology to help? Because we don't have enough cyber officers, we don't have enough signalers, we don't have enough cyber defenders. Reality. So what kind of improvements would you like to see? So I'll start with Allison this time.
An improvement I would make is to implement the concept of zero trust, which basically means trust is not implicitly given, and people have to verify who they are all the time. And it just makes it a lot harder for people to go undetected, and I feel like that's a very important thing, because once you detect it, you're able to defend against it.
I think one of the things is recognizing how cyber affects like all sorts of domains, not just like the one that we work in, or the one that we specialize in, but like how does making more people aware, like how does cyber affect different infrastructures, or how does it affect our different capabilities, especially when commanders have to make those decisions across the board for the next mission.
I kind of want to go off what he said. I think it's just overall awareness, and especially military units down to just the individual soldier. Because, this is something that affects everybody in any domain. Doesn't matter what branch in the Army or branch in the military or civilian background you're with. And so when you can have overall awareness and everyone understands like the vision or the plan that has to do with anything in the cyber domain, I think that overall shared understanding allows for a better path forward. And so if there's some kind of way to introduce, more cyber learning on a basic level to all levels of mindsets, then that general awareness and care for the future in the cyber domain and space will be more appreciated, and the actual steps forward will start.
Come back to Noah.
Yeah, so I'm less sure about the DoD as a whole, but I know one thing I've heard on the Navy side is, or frustration I've heard from officers, is that the highest up leaders in fleet cyber are generally not cyber officers, which leads to a lot of friction. Just the highest up leader doesn't really understand the domain very well, so they end up making decisions that other people down lower don't like. I know the current admiral in charge, Admiral Clapperton. I've only heard good things about him, but I know that's been something that all the officers I've talked to have said they would like to see someone who really understands the cyber domain be in charge of that. I don't know how the other branches are, so I can't speak on that. And then I think, piggybacking off what they have said, I think just giving a better understanding to the higher up leaders about what cyber is, what the threats look like, and also how it can be used offensively is good, because cyber is very different from your normal warfare domain, especially from an offensive perspective. If you fire a cyber weapon, it's not like a missile where the missile is going to hit and blow up the target, or it'll get intercepted, and that's basically your two options unless the target system doesn't work. With cyber, it's like we have this exploit we've developed, and assuming the assumptions we've made about the target network is correct, and assuming they haven't changed anything, and assuming maybe their SOC isn't super vigilant about this certain alert we're never going to trigger, then this will work. But there's usually a lot of assumptions that come before a cyber weapon works, and I think that's often misunderstood by people that are higher up in leadership.
Yeah, I think the Navy has a unique challenge, unique advantage right now, because Clapperton served at both the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command in very key cyber roles. So if the Navy doesn't understand cyber, I think there's a challenge. You're right, though. There's always a layer where it's more operationally focused, and they're worried about getting a job done. Sometimes cybersecurity can be a detriment, right? So maybe talk about how do we continually improve our communication, because a lot of times the cyber folks come at it from a techie perspective and a geek perspective, and we sometimes lose our operators because they just want to get the mission done and they see sometimes cybersecurity as a detriment to that. So maybe I'll start with you, Noah. How we bridge the gap?
I suppose one thing could be to have a sort of screening person actually giving the operational people the information, not just directly the techie person. Because again, most of the techie people I know will only give the very specific technical like information and don't see a point in really like breaking it down to a lower level or find it difficult to do that just because they understand all the technical details and that's how they know it. So that could be something that is done, having a sort of in-between person that is technical enough to understand the really technical guy, but also able to effectively give that information to someone who's less technical in a manner in which they can use it. That's the only real thing I can think of right now.
Okay. Allison?
I think a way we can breach that gap is by making them work together. I know at my NSA internship, I was able to work with a criminal justice major cadet and a psychology cadet. And I was very nervous about how our program or project was gonna come together because I was like, I don't know if they'll understand the code. I don't know if I'll be able to analyze the information as good as they are going to. So then at the end of the day, we all came together and it was like solving a puzzle. Like they had different pieces that I didn't have and I had different pieces that they didn't have. And it was very easy for me to teach them the code and it was very easy for them to teach me the information. And I think making people come together as a team is probably the most effective way to help each other like analyze our strengths and weaknesses.
One way that I think we could bridge the gap from at least a military standpoint is I kind of want to touch on cadet versus experiences. Like how can we integrate like cyber capabilities and EW capabilities in like our NTC or JTC trainings. And I obviously don't have as experience as some of the personnel in this room, but I think it'd be a really beneficial idea to at least like maybe integrate like jamming systems or at least moments where you can take away cyber capabilities from our Blue Force teams or our ally side and really, I guess, really have them realize like what can they or can they not do without those cyber or EW capabilities. That was kind of like a touch on cadet versus experiences in Fort Polk.
Yeah, I think, and it's cliche to say, but you learn the best when you fail. And so we can bridge that gap by essentially engaging an individual's strengths and weaknesses when they're shown like what kind of end result or end state can occur when there's an issue with cyber or something like that. Like that'll open somebody's eyes. So if you were to take, for example, a lower enlisted soldier and show them, hey, this is what's going to happen. For example, if you use high frequency radio when you're not supposed to, or a low frequency or something like that, something that can be jammed easily or penetrated easily in the electromagnetic spectrum. And so when you can show people what does happen when something goes wrong, they're more willing to pay attention to what issues and security threats there are with cyber. And so I know, at least for me, if I was that lower enlisted soldier or someone in the civilian space that doesn't do anything with cyber, if you show me what negative end results can happen in that cyber space and understanding, I'd appreciate it more. And then I try to learn about it more myself.
All right, so the last question before I open it up to the audience, so we have a challenge, right, across all of our services. We have older technologies that are trying to work with newer technologies. You've been in some of these sessions, a lot of times we're talking about the new stuff, we're talking about new modernization efforts. Obviously, you can't flash everything overnight to new equipment. So, there's risks in that old and new technology and sometimes the space that lives in between. So maybe talk about some of the cybersecurity principles that we have to apply to both old and new technologies in a cost-effective way, whether reviewing legacy systems or cutting-edge innovations. What concepts, technology do you see as the greatest threat to our nation or military based upon that that difference that we have across our platforms. Again, I'll start with Noah.
So I'd say like certain principles are pretty common, like making sure all older technologies are patched. If they are no longer, try to make sure if something is no longer supported, either you have a way to support it yourself to continue looking for patches, looking for vulnerabilities and patching those vulnerabilities, or as quick as you can once it's not supported, like get it out of your pipeline, because that's just leaving opportunity for bad actors to find 0 days, and then you're defenseless against them, like for a very long period of time until you get that technology out. I'd say that'd be a big thing. I know something that's been coming down recently at DEF CON. They just announced the winner of the, I believe it was called the Cyber Challenge, like AI reasoning system. I'm getting the name wrong, but basically the idea was to get a bunch of companies and universities to compete to make a cyber reasoning platform that could autonomously find vulnerabilities in software or in binaries and develop patches for them. So I think that's something that could become very useful in the future for patching like legacy technologies. And yeah, that's probably what I got.
Okay. Allison?
I think making sure that your equipment is up to date, like I know you talked about how we can still use old equipment, but I think it is very important for us to make sure that it is like up to the latest software, or like we're updating it, we're checking it for vulnerabilities, making sure that the people who are using it are safe while they're using it. Like, for example, you're not going to deploy a unit with a radio that can be hacked at any point in time. Like, that's just not safe for anybody. And it is better for us to make sure that we're updating everything and just making sure that it is safe for everybody to use.
I think one of the technology that greatest risk to the military, that was the question. Yeah, I think one technology that comes into mind is jamming technology. Honestly, just the idea of your adversaries or even just blue side components just disabling your capabilities is kind of like a scary thing just to think of. Just knowing that something that you rely on for so long or so much can have the possibilities of not being functional, especially when you need it the most, is probably one of the most scariest things that I can think of, at least in this career field. So I think just really kind of going off of like what Allison was saying, like just making sure that our technologies are up to date, assuring that everything is assured, and you can't make anything 100% risk preventable, but what you can do as leaders is prevent as much risk as you can, so the worst outcome is least likely to happen.
Okay, everyone likes to use Apple Maps and Google Maps to, when you're trying to navigate yourself to a restaurant or, friend's house, something like that. But what do you do when it turns off and you don't know where you are in the middle of the road? That's essentially the overall concept. I think it's important with technology, especially in the military. Got to have those backups and not depend on the newest technology. Because even though new technology is always cool, that stuff doesn't like to work all the time. Using old radios versus new ones, I think is super important, knowing how to use each one well enough. I just saw yesterday, I don't know what it's called exactly, but this new form of like the ATAX. So like you can flip down, it's like a phone and there's like a map on it. And this new one I just saw, there's like a radio on it too. It's like the coolest thing ever. Well, what do I do as an officer if that radio doesn't work? I don't have my secondary radio on me. Like, what am I going to do? So I think understanding how to use old technology well is actually good for security risk. And, you could do other things too. If you don't have that new technology and you're just using old stuff and you want to try to, be on the defensive side in the cyberspace, maybe use new ways of communication. So something I learned just a couple weeks ago in the field was operational schedules. So instead of radioing up to your commander or whoever and giving them a whole story of how something's supposed to go about, you just say a keyword and they know exactly what you're going to do. Like, I'm about to head to this road, or I'm about to start and placing my people in their little spots for like some attack. So I think it's being able to use your resources as effectively as possible and not completely depending on new technology just because we're trying to enter some new cyberspace in the world.
All right, so with that, great responses from the panel. We'll open it up for discussion, if I can get any opening questions? Don't be shy. Yeah. Over on the left side.
Thank you. I mean, my first question you just asked them, so I was like, that's actually fantastic. My second one would be, how do you manage risk in coalition and joint operations where partners may have different cyber standards?
So in other words, you know, when you talk about multi-partner networks or where our cybersecurity might be different than other nations. Okay, all right. Anybody want to take that? All right, go ahead.
I think simply just hash it out between the leaders that you're with in those other countries. You know, communication truly is king. And if you can, you know, talk about, you know, the differences and similarities, you can quickly get that connection and be able to make a plan from there. Just play it by ear. You know, you can't prepare for everything. So when you're dealing with new people, just sit back and just listen to what they have to say, do your part. And then as you both learn how you guys both, you know, conduct yourself in the cyberspace, cyber domain, communications therein, then you can finally establish a baseline of understanding with each other instead of trying to make some conventional practice of cyber, because that's just not going to happen. It's technology too, so I just feel like there's always something going to go haywire with that. But yeah, that's my response.
So basically exercise ahead of time, right? Any other thoughts? All right.
Well, I always have some questions because that's what a moderator does, but, and I appreciate the discussion for sure. Some of my own personal history, I've worked as an adjunct professor teaching risk modeling, risk for business decisions. And I've also done some leadership workshops at the lieutenant level and developing their careers. So a question I have, which I haven't heard an answer today, is there a specific model or process or system that one goes through, one to identify risks, assess the risks, either subjectively with some scoring mechanism, and quantifying it and understanding whether it's a low risk with a big probability impact or a high risk with a low probability impact. You can graph all that. And you're a cyber officer and your commander's making a decision. And so we're going to look to the cyber officer and say, okay, what are my risks? Because the decision maker is accepting whatever risks are on the table to accomplish the mission. And so I've been now the third day in this business year and haven't heard anybody talk about how one goes through that. So is that a fair question? You learning how to do that?
Yeah, so what I hear is there a system or capability that we have that assesses risk and then prioritizes that for commanders? Have you had experience with those types of tools yet?
So this summer, I was able to work with like a behavioral modeling software, and we were able to put like all the inputs first, and then it gave us like 1 million emergent behaviors. So it's very easy to like see the different paths that things can go through really quick. So that's the closest I have.
Anybody else have any other thing to add? Go ahead.
Sir, do you mean like how to take any kind of information in the cyberspace and then be able to brief to a commander like what he needs to do?
You've addressed some things like in response to particular activities or what you might recognize as flaws in the spectrum or equipment. to me, those all represent some risk, right? So as a cyber officer, you would take your operation that's being planned, and you're gonna list cyber risks for that operation, because they're going to be different. Might be different environment, different spectrum, different equipment, and you're going to be asked to make some assessment of what those risks are. Are they low? Not a high? Are they high probability or have be a big impact on the mission? So there's this fine line between accepting a risk and impact on mission that's really important from a commander's point of view, making the decision. I've been a commander in the Army, and so in combat, right? And at the lowest level, you're making those real-time assessments. And so as a cyber officer, you're going to be making those real-time assessments to make a recommendation to a commander. I don't want to be in a teaching mode, but I
No,
want to know if that training is going on in the officer development program.
So that would happen at Bullock, but there's also a great gray zone between what the signal officer does and what a cyber officer does, or the cyber community, I should say. So a lot of times the risk assessments, the Nessa scans, those types of things are done on the networks. There's also risk that, especially the cyber defenders, when they come in, typically at that point you already have an adversary identified on your network before the defenders start coming in. Because again, cyber officers are a smaller asset, and we want to employ them as an Army where they're most needed. Alphas, well, the offensive folks are doing more nation-state activities. You also have the defenders that are defending against nation-state activities. There are NSA blue teams, NSA green teams that will come out and help commanders at times. The challenge is I'm giving you very technical responses because it's really hard to assess vulnerabilities that you can't scan. So a radio is more in the EW realm, depending upon which aspect you're talking about. So it blends across cyber, signal, EW, and other aspects.
So you just remind me of a combat experience. So I was the radio officer for the 173rd Airborne Infantry in Vietnam, and the brigade commander made a comment to me once in a particular operation that said he wanted 2 means of communications. I was like, 2 means? What does that mean? Right? I didn't learn anything over here in the signal school about 2 means, but I thought about it a while. I have a technical background. He didn't mean 2 radios. And so in Firebase, radio is 1 mean, right? That's vulnerable. And the other means is wire. And so I made an arrangement with a South Vietnamese Army unit that I knew Firebase next to us, and I knew they had a drop on the switchboard. Didn't have anybody spoke English, but I got them to put a drop on the switchboard. I ran a wire, and I taught that unit how to plug that one into the USRV switch network. 2 means, right? So I think that's kind of where I come from. The commander had in his mind he had risk with radio. He was a general, right? That's why he was brigade commander, and I'm just a brand new radio officer. But being able to make those kinds of assessments in the context of the operations mission that you're on, to me, that was a real learning lesson to me the rest of my career in the Army, to understand those subtle differences. And the commander, whatever level I was at, expected me to make that assessment. So I wasn't sure I was taught that in a signal school. Maybe they teach it now.
No, sometimes that's OJT. So I think you got a couple of questions in the back there.
So, I gotta ask you for that, sir. So they do teach the military.
Wait. Can't hear you.
So to your point, sir, they do teach that in Bullock and Bullock 2.
It's called a military decision-making process. It goes on to FM 3-0, which is military operations. In that, this is where they teach the young officers, and then when NCOs get to a certain rank, we get sent off to battle staff. So we are all taught that from a very young age to a medium range, to where we can offer the commander, here's your risk assessment, here are your COAs, here's your time for you to make a decision, sir. So we can actually get that commander the right information at the right time so they can make a very valid assessment. Now, as far as on the defender side, we went from DIACAP to the risk management framework. I think that's what you're kind of touching on as well. So the risk management framework is this huge packet that's part of the tenant security plan of any unit that has any type of cyber critical assets list. So what they do is they identify the critical asset list, they go to the commander and like, hey, is this important to you? Is this not? We need your help to scrub the list. Then they get the blast off and then they start annotating, and it's a living document. It's not something that we put on the shelf for like 5 years and then revisit it. It's like a continuous inspection and reinspection of all of our critical assets. Hopefully that helps, sir.
I'm accustomed there being a medication and mitigating strategy that goes with each one of those risks. So it's part of the plan.
So with cyber being its own domain, a digital domain, got it, but it's its own domain, and every branch pretty much having its own cyber command and their own processes and their own procedures, what are the risks that you guys think might be involved with coming together for joint operations when everybody's pretty much operating with their own technology and own procedures separately?
I think one of the big risks is that everyone trains their people differently. So the standards and the things that individual units will, or individual branches will know at the same sort of position will be different. So I think there could be some communication problems and then just expectations that end up conflicting in a joint operation. But also I know, at least from what I've seen, which is very limited, but many operations when it comes to cyber are joint. So I think that's usually fleshed out pretty early. But I have heard people saying that we do need a cyber branch to like get rid of those, make it completely standardized, like so there's not all these differences in how different officers are trained, and there's like one standard.
So you're all still students and undergrads, and you've got some great programs of study at your school, but what else do you have that have given you actual practical experience? What kind of labs do you have access to, ranges? What have you been able to do to actually hone your craft while you're still in school?
So we do have a cyber range at our school now, but it's like just become operational, so I haven't had much chance to toy with it yet. We have a good few labs. We have a malware analysis lab that's just getting its feet under itself. We just got the Proxmox server set up for that. We also have an IoT lab. That has, for the past few years, it's had mostly just PLCs and different other critical infrastructure type hardware and software. But just this year, we now have a sort of car hacking lab for CAN bus and other related car technologies. And then beyond that, we also have, or the biggest things that the most students participate in, I'd say would be like the Cyber Club, which is more, it's ran by students to help the underclass like get their baseline knowledge, and also provides some beginner like CTF type competitions. And then above that, we have the Cyber Team, which is our more like premier competing team. And we usually compete probably in at least like 10 competitions a semester. That's where most of my experiences come from. That's been like huge for me.
So Norwich right now is in the works of building a new cyber building. I unfortunately will not be around to reap the benefits of it because I'll have already been graduated by then. It's due to, I believe, set to be finished building around like fall of 2026. We have that. We have, we've had this for a little while. We have the War Room, which is pretty much our, we conduct a lot of like our like CTF team stuff in there. A lot of our cyber clubs will do their business in the War Room. We have a Cypher team, or really a Cypher club. They run a lot of our servers for the school. It's all mostly student-led. I can't remember the name of our advisor anymore, but yeah, they run a lot of like the servers, especially when it comes to running a lot of the school's virtual machines for a lot of our coding classes. They'll usually do all that. We have our research institute, for Norwich. They will do a lot of like interdisciplinary, like a lot of information warfare, cross cyber research that they offer to students for internships throughout the year. But we have a lot of capabilities and a lot of facilities for students in pursuing careers in cyber.
Yeah, and obviously the MSO club that or opportunity that happened this summer up at Norwich, and then some AI capabilities that I think are being funded across senior military college clearly have some impacts that this group may not be able to participate in, but when you start looking forward. And we can't forget Cadet Command does fund a bunch of internships. Their funding sometimes waxes and wanes. So there's multiple opportunities that are funded. So as we are concluding here, just think about, again, they're students, good point, Sharon. These students have had a lot of experience outside of the classroom that, sometimes that funding comes together through political action for various reasons. We have folks that are fighting for students to have these additional exposure opportunities like capture the flag opportunities, exercises. We talk about internships. Those are huge because as a relatively new branch, cyber, we are still gaining a lot of knowledge, at least on the officer level, from the degrees and experiences that they have in college, and then taking that and hopefully ramping that up from an Army training perspective or Navy training perspective, as the case may be. So with that, I'd like to thank you for coming in and participating, asking amazing questions. We'll hang around for a little bit, but please show some appreciation for our next generation of cyber.